The avro, shown in flight in 1958, was designed to defend Canada against bomber attacks from the Soviet Union. Canada Aviation and Space Museum, Lake Ontario, Canada. The marina here on the northern shore of Lake Ontario, in Prince Edward County, had attracted an unusually large crowd of people and dogs from a nearby campground, gawking as a flatbed truck arrived with an autonomous submarine, the Thunderfish Alpha. The submarine, equipped with a high-resolution sonar system, was on a mission to search for 9 test models of a Canadian legend, the avro supersonic military jet, that have been resting deep in the lake since the Cold War era. The Thunderfish Alpha, an autonomous submarine, was lowered into Lake Ontario last month to hunt for relics of a famed Canadian jet fighter program. Cole Burston for the New York Times. The plane was designed and built in the 1950s in what was then the fringes of Toronto. Its swept-back delta wings and early electronic flight controls gave it the look of tomorrow, as did its blinding white, matte black and day-glow orange paint. In 1959, before the plane could enter military duty, the program was scrapped. Early models were cut apart and their blueprints destroyed along with the machines used to make the aircraft. But before production began, the 9 test models were fired off on rockets over Lake Ontario from a military artillery range near the marina to gauge their flight worthiness. Avro rocket tests. Video by Canada Aviation Museum. In the decades since the program was abruptly dropped, the Aero story has become one of Canada's greatest bits of folklore, and not just among the military or aviation buffs sometimes known as arrowheads. "I've been interested in the thing since I was a kid. It's just a piece of Canadian legend," said Joel Shaver, a 44-year-old police officer from Ottawa. He learned about the Aero from a family friend and has passed his passion for it along to his son, Ethan, 8, who was with him at the dock last month. "It was something that could have been," Mr. Shaver said. "It could have been the best plane in the world for all we know, but they destroyed it before it could have proved itself. That's why I'm so interested in it." Many other Canadians born long after blowtorches were used to cut up the planes also know the story and lament what could have been, stoking the idea, sometimes verging on conspiracy theory, that the Aero's cancellation is an example of the United States thwarting a Canadian ambition. And for a project that was cut down in its prime, the Aero has enjoyed a remarkable cultural afterlife. Each decade seems to bring yet another Aero history. Dan Aykroyd starred in a somewhat fictionalized mini-series about the fighter plane. One museum's collection boasts a full-size model of the Aero while another is building a flying replica. The hometown of its test pilot has monuments to both him and the plane. Structural testing of the avro model for free flight in 1957. Canada Aviation and Space Museum, now members of Toronto's financial community, led by John Brzezinski, the chief executive of the Toronto-based Osisko Mining, have raised about $850,000 Canadian dollars to pay for the sonar search. There had been failed efforts in the past to hunt for the models, each weighing 500 pounds and about 12 feet long and 10 feet wide. The inspiration to try again came out of a meeting Mr. Brzezinski had with several other Canadian businessmen in a Chicago hotel bar about 18 months ago. At the time, there was considerable attention to an ultimately successful expedition to find 2 ships from a doomed expedition in the 1840s to map the Northwest Passage through what is now Canada's Arctic. "We were looking for something to do in our spare time," said Mr. Brzezinski, whose company holds several gold claims in Ontario and Quebec. He arrived at the marina, at Quince-Ilcom Park, as part of the motorcade that included the truck with the Thunderfish Alpha. Dressed in a flight suit, he was behind the wheel of an Aston Martin DB9 convertible decorated to resemble the second avro to roll off the assembly line, the RL-202. A mock warning, "Jet fuel only," was stenciled below the car's gas cap. John Brzezinski helped raise money to pay for the submarine search for the plane's test models. Cole Burston for the New York Times. The avro was initiated by a post-war Liberal government and was to have been Canada's main contribution to NORAD, the Joint Air Defence Alliance with the United States. Powered by 2 jet engines of a new Canadian design, the Aero was supposed to swoop up to Canada's Arctic at nearly twice the speed of sound and shoot down Soviet bombers making their way to North America with nuclear payloads. Aero in the sky. Avro aircraft first flight. Video by Canada Aviation Museum. "We probably did have the world's best supersonic fighter jet in principle," said Randall Wakelam, a historian at Royal Military College in Kingston, Ontario, an hour or so to the east of Prince Edward County. "In practice, however, we had all these problems. Even by the standards of military programs, the Aero's cost spiraled out of control as the manufacturer, the British-owned Avro Canada, struggled with creating an entirely new aircraft design and new engines while also pioneering electronic flight controls and weapons guidance systems. Then came the launch by the Soviet Union of Sputnik, the first satellite. From that point on, it was assumed that any nuclear Armageddon would be delivered by missiles. Just as its production was ramping up, the Arrow had no more reason for being. The Avro Arrow RL-201 taking off for the first time, with the test pilot Janusz Zurikowski at the controls. Canada Aviation and Space Museum. The Arrow's cost and its capabilities doomed its future for any other roller for sales in other markets, said Aaron Gregory, an assistant curator at the Canada Aviation and Space Museum in Ottawa who is working with Mr. Brzezinski's group. The project was overly ambitious, she said. It was way too much airplane. The only other country that could have used it would have been Russia. On February 20, 1959, the Conservative government of Prime Minister John Diefenbaker killed the program and bought American interceptor missiles to replace the Arrow. Overnight at least 25,000 people, many highly skilled, were jobless. While most historians agree that even a liberal government would have made the same move, Mr. Diefenbaker's decision was highly unpopular in Ontario. Various theories aside, government documents from the time indicate that the United States tried to help Canada fund the project in 1958 but was rebuffed. Mr. Brzezinski diplomatically avoids weighing in on the government's decision, but he does think the destruction of the jets has played a major role in keeping the Arrow's legend alive. One of the largest surviving pieces, a nose section now on display at the museum in Ottawa, has "Cut Here" written in marker beside a jagged blowtorch line. The largest remaining piece of an Avro Arrow. On display at the Canada Aviation and Space Museum in Ottawa. Ian Austin, New York Times. An unusually stormy summer in southern Ontario has played havoc with the hunt for the models. The morning Mr. Shaver and his son came to the docks, high waves prevented the Thunderfish Alpha from doing much more than zigzag around the marina before being loaded back on its truck. Last week, however, Mr. Brzezinski's group found one of the models lying upside down on the rocky lake bed and covered in zebra mussels. A photograph shows that its nose is broken or bent, making the model somewhat resemble a seal turning its head. It will be well into next year before a plan is fully developed to safely lift and stabilize the model. While conditions permit, the sonar hunt for the other 8 will continue. Even though Mr. Shaver was not at the marina the day of the discovery, like many Canadians, he remains hopeful that an even bigger find may come one day. An actual Arrow. There's the myth that there's still one out there, hidden away in a barn or stuck in an underground bunker somewhere, he said, laughing. You never know. High waves on this day meant that Thunderfish Alpha was able to only zigzag around the marina before being taken out of the water. Cole Burston for the New York Times. Follow Ian Austin on Twitter at Ian Roston.